Ukrainian forces have successfully executed mid-range strikes against key Russian military infrastructure. These attacks targeted supply lines and command centers deep behind the front lines. The strikes are designed to degrade Russia's operational capacity and force a rethink of their defensive strategies. As the conflict in Ukraine enters its fifth year, data reveals the staggering human and material cost of the invasion. Millions of citizens have been displaced, while both militaries have suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties. This toll highlights the transition from a rapid invasion to a grinding, long-term war of attrition. Growing tensions in the Middle East have evolved into a proxy struggle between the interests of Ukraine and Russia. Moscow is increasingly leveraging its ties to Iran to secure military supplies, while diverting Western focus away from Kiev. This alignment threatens to expand the geopolitical reach of the Ukraine conflict. International analysts are struggling to identify a viable path toward ending the war in Ukraine. Deep-seated mistrust and conflicting territorial demands have rendered traditional peace negotiations ineffective. Without a breakthrough, both sides remain locked in a cycle of violence with no clear end in sight. The war in Ukraine has shifted into a grueling test of national resilience and economic sustainability. Both nations are mobilizing their entire industrial bases to outlast the opponent's resources. This shift prioritizes long-term stability over short-term territorial gains, forcing Ukraine to rely on sustained international aid. Updated mapping data reveals the slow, incremental shifts in territory along the front lines between Ukraine and Russia. These visual trackers show that despite massive investment in personnel, frontline movement remains largely stagnant. The maps serve as a reminder of the entrenched nature of the current combat zones. Linked communications have confirmed that Cameroonian nationals acting as military contractors have been killed while fighting in Ukraine. This discovery highlights the global reach of Russian recruitment efforts to fill frontline gaps. The involvement of foreign mercenaries underscores the Kremlin's desperate need for manpower. Russian forces have initiated a new major offensive across eastern Ukraine, taking advantage of shifting global priorities. President Zelensky has expressed alarm that the world's focus on the Iran conflict is weakening support for Kiev. This timing allows Moscow to push forward with less fear of an immediate, unified international response. As international attention pivots to rising tensions in Iran, Russia has launched a coordinated spring offensive in Ukraine. The Kremlin is betting that global powers are too preoccupied with Middle Eastern instability to provide Ukraine with necessary defensive support. This emboldened strategy seeks to capitalize on a perceived vacuum in Western policy. On the fourth anniversary of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine held solemn commemorations for the soldiers and civilians lost in the conflict. The ceremonies serve as a reminder of the immense sacrifice made to maintain national sovereignty. These tributes underscore the emotional burden the population continues to carry as the war enters its fifth year. After 4 years of combat, military analysts are evaluating whether Russian forces have effectively adapted their tactical approach. While early failures were marked by poor planning, recent operations show a more methodical, albeit costly, use of artillery and manpower. This evolution suggests a military that has learned to sustain a long-term conflict. The visual retrospective of the war in Ukraine highlights the massive destruction of infrastructure and the toll on the civilian population. Images capture both the intensity of the front lines and the resilience of those living under constant bombardment. These photos document the transformation of the country since the invasion began 4 years ago. Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine was rooted in a desire to reassert Russian regional dominance and halt Western expansion. Experts remain divided on how the conflict will conclude, citing the possibility of a frozen conflict or a total military victory by either side. The outcome depends largely on future Western political willpower and Russian internal stability. Military strategists are debating whether the conflict in Ukraine could reach a definitive conclusion by 2026. Projections depend on the exhaustion of military stockpiles and the potential for a diplomatic breakthrough. However, current trends suggest that both nations are preparing for a long-term struggle that may extend well beyond that date. The rapid dronization of the battlefield is fundamentally changing how Russia and Ukraine conduct operations. Automated aerial vehicles are now the primary tool for both surveillance and precision strikes, replacing traditional artillery in many sectors. This technological shift has increased the rate of mutual attrition, making the war more lethal than ever. Satellite data from the Sentinel-2 mission reveals unprecedented destruction of Ukraine's forest ecosystems due to military activity. Explosions, fires, and the construction of defensive fortifications have caused long-term environmental degradation. This ecological damage will take decades to remediate, posing a significant challenge to the country's post-war recovery. A comprehensive review of the war in Ukraine at the 4-year mark reveals a conflict that has reshaped global security. The war has forced a total realignment of European energy policies and international alliances. Analysts emphasize that the current trajectory necessitates a long-term strategy for containment and regional stability. The war in Ukraine has served as a wake-up call for Australia regarding the potential for conflict in the Asia-Pacific region. Defense experts argue that the Russian invasion demonstrates the fragility of current global order. Consequently, Australia is accelerating its military preparedness to address potential future threats in its own neighborhood. The integration of private technology companies into state military operations is permanently changing the nature of war. Private satellite networks and software firms are now providing critical battlefield data and communication infrastructure for Ukraine. This shift creates new challenges for international law and the traditional state-run model of warfare. Colorado lawmakers have identified 6 primary themes for the 2026 legislative session, including housing affordability and water management. These priorities aim to address the state's rapid growth and the resulting strain on public services. The session will focus on crafting policies that balance economic development with environmental sustainability.